I'd like to call the Consumer Assistance Advisory Committee meeting of the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange Board to order. Mr. Hager, Mr. Bowden, are we ready up north?
Yes, we are.
And I'd like to welcome everybody who is either viewing this online or listening by phone or participating either north or south. Thank you for attending. And could we get a roll call, please?
Ms. Lewis?
Present.
Mr. Downey?
Present.
Ms. Ellis? Appears to be absent. Ms. Joyner?
Here.
Mr. Mazzoni?
Here.
Mr. McCoy?
Here.
Ms. Prouty-Boothman? Appears to be absent. And Mr. Rodriguez? Also appears to be absent. Ms. Chair? Atkins?
Present. Present.
All are accounted for.
Thank you very much. Are any of our board members participating by phone? Or committee members, I apologize. For those of you participating by phone, if you could please put your phone on mute and not on hold, and then unmute it if there's a point in time where you would like to make a public comment. With that, Mr. Hager and Mr. Bowden, do you have any announcements?
Madam Chair, I was just curious if there was a member of the AG's team in Las Vegas.
Yes, Sophie Long, I'm present.
Excellent. Thank you. No announcements at this time.
With that, I'd like to open it up to public comment. If there's anybody that would like public comment in the north or south, please begin moving forward. It does not look like there's any public comment at this time in the south. Is there any public comment in the north? Thank you. And if we could limit public comment at this time to 3 minutes. And please state your name and your organization for the record. If the person is making public comment, we cannot hear anything.
Okay. My name is Warren Rund with Polestar Benefits. So I'm reading a letter that was submitted by Dan Heffley that cannot attend this morning. So he would like me to read this statement here. He'd like to bring your attention to some statements on agenda item 06-A, web-based broker study, that are inaccurate. Specifically, the paragraph on page 18, which states, the exchange must establish rigorous controls to prevent steering and improper disclosure of consumer information. This will be a significant challenge. Historically and currently, agents and brokers have built alliances with insurance and are paid to market plans to desirable consumers. As sellers of exchange products, agents and brokers will need to operate agnostically, informing consumers about exchange products and cost-sharing obligations that meet their needs. This is a fundamental challenge for both the exchange and the agent-broker community. There are two central ideas in this paragraph, both of which are inaccurate and deserve to be examined. Steerage. There are already procedures, state mandates, and a formal oversight entity that prevents steerage to a large degree. So the challenge alluded to simply does not exist. While it is true that agents and brokers market product to consumers, health insurance is different from other types of insurance in that A, it is a high utilization product, and B, producers get paid monthly service compensation as opposed to lump sum payments found in other insurance products. As such, the arrangement is more akin to an accountant or payroll service that have clients on an ongoing basis rather than a one-time sale profession such as a car or home purchase. If a producer's client is set up with the wrong product due to the fact that it is a high utilization product, the first time a claim is incurred and is not paid to the client's satisfaction, the producer loses that client, and by default, that income stream. In the unlikely event that a consumer is harmed by a producer placing them with the wrong product, the client has recourse via the producer's errors and omissions policy. Additionally, the Department of Insurance investigates all consumer complaints and otherwise oversees all producer activity. They have the ability to discipline negligent producers, including the levying of fines, license suspension, and other discipline under the law. And then the second idea is improper disclosure. Producers by nature deal with personal health information and personal identity information on a daily basis and have contractual obligations with carriers as well as statutory requirements under the HIPAA Privacy Act that protect consumer information. In addition to federal penalties for noncompliance, producers also fall under the jurisdiction of the Nevada Department of Insurance as stated above. In closing, the producer community has a long-standing record of service and impartiality to consumers. The preceding paragraph stating otherwise does our profession a disservice and perpetuates stereotypes that are simply not true for the majority of professional producers. We feel the subcommittee's fears are misplaced. We are far more concerned about newly licensed navigators who have not made a career of knowing the insurance market than we have about producers who continue to deal with new product and new laws on a daily basis, some for 40 years or more, many of which have gone above and beyond their initial training, earning professional designations. We would ask that the entire document be reviewed for accuracy, that the paragraph in question be rewritten to more accurately reflect the regulated, honorable profession that producers work in, or be discarded entirely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have public comment in Las Vegas. And thank you. If you please press the button in front of you and please state your name and organization for the record. And again, we have a 3-minute time. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Casal. Patrick Casal and Associates. Been an agent in Las Vegas in the state of Nevada for 20 plus years. You know, it's interesting to look at the scenarios that were presented regarding internet shopping. Quite frankly, when you look at eHealth and healthinsurance.com, stuff that are national, they don't provide the personal services. That they do is they give you a menu of products that are purchased. What I can tell you is that consumers have had what they'll normally do is they'll be guided to purchase an insurance plan that's for affordable in their mind. Not necessarily a benefit plan, but they buy price. The same situation happens with Medicare Part D. It's very, very difficult for the average consumer to just go online and buy anything that's more expensive because they don't know the difference. It looks the same, it feels the same, I'm going to buy it. And what really happens later on down the line is that complaints are filed because they're not getting what they believe they purchased. McEvely Benefits, you have a good comparison. Brian does provide personal services. So the big difference is Brian McEvely is not a national broker where he's just getting hits, thousands of hits, and people are buying because it's the internet way to go and it's a new generation. The reality is some of these services that you have listed here aren't providing the service that we need. And I agree wholeheartedly with the way where the insurance brokers are looked at differently. But for the most part, the professionals that I work with, they work with consumers one-on-one. They hold their hands and they guide them. And that's really the big problem in the world of insurance today is lack of communication and lack of understanding. A professional broker does provide those services over and above, from adjudicating a claim to explaining the right questions to ask about providership and within the PPO or HMO plan, why you need to do this, what questions to ask. And so I think the role of the navigator and the role of the broker are overlapping. But the thing that gets us when we read this stuff, it's like the average broker doesn't care. And I can tell you right now, I've been there when people are ready to die. I've held their hands, helped them get their claims adjudicated. Whether it was my client or a friend or somebody else's client, I was just there to help. So I think when you hear what Dan wrote, those are some of the things that we have to look at. And I think what we're against is it seems like we're getting slammed for not providing services, and we do. And that 20% that's uninsured, we have to remember that about 65% can afford insurance, choose not to buy it. So we're looking at that 35%, the person who needs our help even more as far as guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any additional public comment in Las Vegas? Any additional public comment in Carson City?
There is not.
Any public comment on the telephone? I do not hear any. With that, I'm going to close public comment
Madam
and
Chair.
move on to...
And I'd like to point out
Yes?
that Mr. Heffley's comments are posted online for the committee if they'd like to read it later. From the first public comment.
Thank you very much. And also for the record, Ms. Ellis is in attendance here in Las Vegas. With that, if we could go to the minutes on agenda item 3, and I actually have a couple, I think maybe 2 corrections. If I could start that, and then I'll open it up for any other corrections. On item number, let me get this. Item number 6, the aggregated billing motion, I thought the motion was clear that it was Xerox is going to offer aggregated billing, which will be at the option of the consumer. And if that wasn't in the motion, it definitely was in the discussion. So if that is my memory. And so I'm not sure if the motion is correct or if we can just adjust the narrative above it. That's my first comment. And then my other comment is in item number 9. It says that Ms. Atkins says that the committee is very interested in being part of the serious guidelines for a navigator. I'm assuming that's typo. I don't know, maybe. Maybe just the guidelines. I don't know, maybe the unserious part of the guidelines. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm not sure. Maybe I misspoke or anyway, if that could just get fixed, I'd appreciate that.
So item 9 we'll strike serious. And then for item number 6, we are required by federal regulation, federal law, to allow individuals to pay the carriers directly. So that's not necessary. It's not necessary to be part of that motion. So the motion is correct as it's written. We will obviously allow individuals to pay the carriers directly because we're required to by federal law.
And I do think we discussed that at length. Could you just put what you just said then in the narrative right above the motion?
We'll do that.
Thank you. Are there any other additions or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Madam Chair, I so move. This is Randall Downey for the record.
Is there a second?
Levon Lewis, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. With that, we're at agenda item 4. Mr. Bowden?
The status of work completed related to the Consumer Advisory Committee. The committee has gone through 3 approvals. We have 3 motions waiting to be approved by the board. They would have been heard at the last board meeting, but they were postponed to this next coming board meeting because of time constraints. The agenda was just too full. At this point, we have 2 items that were under review today, which are web brokers and the appeals process. And then we will have 2 items for a future meeting, including detailed consumer assistance programs and evaluation and monitoring programs. And that concludes the committee calendar report.
Are there any questions by committee members of Mr. Bowden on the committee calendar? All right, we'll close agenda item 4 and move to agenda item 5. Mr. Bowden?
Agenda item number 5, consumer complaints and appeals. The purpose of this report is to provide information regarding the types of appeals that the exchange will encounter, a proposed hearing process, the required budget for the in-house operations of the exchange appeals unit, and the option of contracting out the appeals function of the exchange. To give a little bit of background on this issue, the operations that the exchange conducts will result in decisions that will affect consumers, employers, and qualified health plan issuers. The March 27th final rule from CMS codified requirements that address the initial and annual enrollment periods, special enrollment periods, employers who are told that they're subject to penalties because they may not offer minimum essential coverage, and that final rule indicated that the detailed guidelines related to consumer appeals of eligibility will be released in future rulemaking. CMS has pulled that as a requirement of the exchange right now, but it would be prudent for the exchange to consider eligibility determination appeals, APTC advanced premium tax credit appeals, and employer appeals, and address a system or process to deal with them effectively. When researching the issue at hand, staff met with several departments within the state of Nevada, including the Department of Administration Hearings Division, the Department of Health and Human Services Division of Welfare and Supportive Services, and the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation to gain insight on what the current hearing processes are and how we may use processes that are still in the state and pulled from the existing knowledge. Looking at all the appeals processes that are out there, the Department of Welfare and Supportive Services process is the most similar to the kind of appeals that the exchange will face. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the DWSS appeals process and how they have pulled their team together. Currently, DWSS processes all of the appeals of coverage through its centralized hearings representative team. They call this the CHART team. The CHART team deals with an average of 400 to 500 appeals per month, broken out into the following categories. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. The food stamps program is 51% of the appeals. Medicaid eligibility would be 30% of the appeals. Medical assistance for the aged, blind, and disabled, or MABID, is 10%. And the temporary assistance for needy families, or CASH, is 8%. And then investigation and recovery, things that they go out and pull back, are about 1% of the appeals. To handle this monthly caseload, the CHART team is comprised of a supervisor, 7 pre-hearing officers, an administrative assistant. These 9 team members effectively handle the appeals from initial receipt to the handoff to the hearings officer. All decisions for benefits of eligibility or coverage under programs administered by DWSS have a 90-day appeal window. If the client does not appeal the decision within this time frame, the appeal becomes invalid, and it stops at that point. Appeals for all categories except SNAP must be submitted in writing at a DWSS office. The appeals are then logged and immediately forwarded within 10 days to the CHART team. At this point, the appeal is assigned to a pre-hearings officer who will reveal the appeals for validity, confirming that the facts of the caseworker who reached the decision. If all the facts substantiate the caseworker's decision, the pre-hearing officer issues a second notice and closes the case. If the pre-hearing officer finds errors in the work done by the department, the case is sent back to a caseworker to restart the entire process. If the client disagrees with these findings of the second notice, the pre-hearing officer will prepare a packet to present to the hearing officer on behalf of the agency. At this point, the case moves to the administrative adjudications team. The DWSS adjudications team is comprised of 2 administrative assistants, a chief who spends about 10 to 15% of the allotted full-time employee managing the hearing process, and 2 hearings officers. The hearings officers schedule and conduct all the hearings in the following manner. The agency presents its case. The client presents their case. Many clients bring legal representation. The agency responds to the client's case. The hearing officer then closes the hearing and deliberates the information provided. And lastly, the hearings officer renders a final written decision. The decision made by the hearing officer will stand as final or may be appealed yet again to district court. Of the 144 to 160 hearings conducted each year, approximately 5 or 3% are appealed to district court. The team conducts approximately 12 to 15 hearings per month. Dealing with appeals in the exchange. Consumers will have multiple ways to appeal decisions of eligibility and advanced premium tax credit. Xerox State Healthcare LLC solution provides the ability to file an appeal in their account online at any time. When a person comes in through the web portal, they will be putting in information. As soon as they enter their income, if it goes out for verification and the income that the federal hub has does not match the income provided by the consumer, they will be alerted and they will be able to file a change at that point in their account. They may call the customer call center and file an appeal. They may file an appeal in writing and send it to the customer service center. And they may file an appeal in person at one of our walk-in centers or one of the DWSS centers that we're going to partner with. The exchange should determine how appeals must be submitted. May a consumer file an appeal online or by telephone? What appeals will be required to be submitted in writing? When an appeal is filed, it will be logged and immediately forwarded to an appeal specialist at the Customer Service Center. Xerox State Healthcare, LLC indicates that the Customer Service Center will have a minimum of 3 appeal specialists available during normal business hours. Xerox has also stated there will be more appeal specialists available during open enrollment periods and during periods of high demand. The appeal specialist will issue a notice of appeal and gather the required supporting information from the consumer and the consumer's application. The exchange should determine the level of authority granted to the Customer Service Center to resolve appeals. The Customer Service Center has the ability to accept an appeal, research the appeal, and make a decision and issue a notice of decision on a number of appeals issues. Xerox, our provider we're currently contracted with, has the ability to deal with many, if not most, of the appeals that will come through the exchange. If a decision is made by the Customer Service Center is contested at this point, the appeal would be escalated to a formal hearing process. In the exchange, the formal hearing process, we have a few options that we can go by. It's evident that we'll be required to provide consumers with a formal hearing system that will render a final decision on their appeal. We've researched a few different processes that are currently operating in the state of Nevada, and we can offer the following options. The exchange could establish an in-house hearing department. Based on the 500 monthly appeals at DWSS, of which 30%, approximately 150, are Medicaid appeals, the exchange could expect approximately 65 appeals per month in the first year and 90 appeals per month in the long term. Though it should be noted that many of the Medicaid appeals are claims appeals, not eligibility appeals. Most of those appeals will be concluded at the Customer Service Center and not require a formal hearing. Staff anticipates that 6 to 9 appeals per month, approximately 10%, assume it's about triple the appeal rate at DWSS, will escalate to a formal hearing process. To address the caseload, the exchange would require 2 positions that would cost the exchange approximately $151,000 the first year and $147,000 every year thereafter. Another option for the exchange is to contract with the existing state agency, Nevada Department of Administration Hearings Division, to handle the appeals. I've had some preliminary talks with the Hearings Division, and at this point it appears that they do have capacity to handle the caseload of the appeals that the exchange will have, and moving forward we can work on a cost-sharing basis, much like our cost-sharing with the Department of Welfare and Supportive Services on the eligibility engine. Our use of that, we pay per use. We could also set up a system where we would pay the Department of Administrative Hearings Division a per use fee. Recommendations. The committee is asked to make recommendations to the board on the following items. The first would be define the means by which a consumer may submit an appeal to the exchange. The second would be to define the scope of authority that will be given to the Customer Service Center appeals specialist to resolve the appeals before they are escalated to the exchange. And the third would be to provide the board with a recommendation to build a hearing department within the exchange or contract with an existing agency that has the capacity to conduct the exchange's hearings. And at that point, Madam Chair, we can open it up for discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. I have 2 questions, I guess, that will help me understand this conversation. It appears from my reading of the document we're discussing eligibility appeals, not claim, service, denials of service. Is that correct? Am I reading this correctly?
Yes, Mr. Downey, that is correct. All of the appeals that you stated, the claims appeals, denial of service, will be handled at the carrier level, not at the exchange.
Thank you. And my second question relates to the final item. either developing an in-house appeals department or division or contracting with DWSS. Do you have any estimates? And you've provided costs for the in-house. Is there any estimate of what the cost share, the liability would be for the exchange if we contracted with the state agency?
At this point, we do not have those numbers. If it is a recommendation of the committee to move forward at looking at contracting it out, the staff would come together, put together a formal report on exactly what it would cost and the services that will be given on a per hearing basis.
Lynn Atkins, for the record. And my understanding is, at least on item number C, that we are going to be making a recommendation that either, if we recommend that the exchange develop a hearing department, or if we contract out with an existing agency, then staff's going to go back and develop that a little bit more detail and bring that back to the committee. Is that right?
Yes, Madam Chair, that is correct. For the record, C.J. Bowden. If we decide to move with an external agency to conduct the hearings, then staff would bring back a complete report on how that would be with cost, finance, and scope. If we decide to move forward with establishing our own exchange hearings division, we've provided the staff that will be required. We can look a little bit deeper into locations and how the hearings will be held if the committee would like to do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey, for the record. May I ask that we consider each of these separately and not as a package?
Sure, no problem. We'll do that, especially when we get further down for motion. So,
may I speak to the first one?
Absolutely.
Thank you. In terms of defining how to submit an appeal to the exchange, I recommend we be as broad as possible. I think it should be the right of the consumer to submit an appeal in writing, online, or orally. I think they should have the right to review records. They should have the right to an in-person video or teleconference hearing. They should have the right to add new information at each level of an appeal. And I think that all of these appeals should be culturally and linguistically appropriate. And I think we need to institute those protections for consumers in our appeals process. I believe that we're discussing eligibility appeals. I believe this committee should further, at a later date, consider service denial, benefit limitations, and those sorts of appeals as a separate issue.
Mr. Mazzoni?
Dwight Mazzoni, for the record. Should these appeals be held by DWSS, would they be held at the current DWSS offices, Belrose, Henderson, or could they be held, for instance, here in this building in Las Vegas? Had several commentary from both my end of the business as well as from people talking to the general public that they're very concerned the fact that there won't be ostensibly there will not be a bricks and mortar location for the exchange in Las Vegas. So concerned that people would have to go stand in line at the Belrose office with everybody else to get their appeal done and how that might work. So I'd be very concerned that if we were tied up with DWSS, it would not show favorably upon the exchange or upon what we're trying to do in keeping this as professional as possible. Not that DWSS is not professional, but it's a different cat we're trying to work with here.
For the record, C.J. Bowden. Mr. Mazzoni, in looking at the appeals process, we looked at the process that DWSS has, but we wouldn't be looking at contracting with DWSS. We've talked to staff at DWSS, and it appears that they do not have the capacity to handle our appeals load. They're at capacity with themselves. We would be looking at contracting with an agency such as the Department of Administration Hearings Division. They also do DWSS appeals. They take their overflow caseload and some of the more complicated hearings. So we would contract with that division, not DWSS directly. And the Department of Administration has a brick and mortar office in Las Vegas to handle these, and it's not at the DWSS location. I can find that location out for you and let you know if the exchange decides to go in that direction.
I think that would be an important piece of information. And I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said earlier. I thought you said that there was consideration for using DWSS to do this for us. So I apologize if I misunderstood.
Ms. Lewis?
I forgot my question. But I did want to agree with the recommendations made by Mr. Downey.
Any comments up north? We still have more comments down here, but I didn't want to forget our committee members up north.
Yes, please. For the record, Tom McCoy. Recommendation B, I have a little issue, I think, with the way it's been prepared here. It says define the scope of authority that will be given to the Customer Service Center appeals specialist to resolve appeals before they are escalated to the exchange. My understanding was that the Xerox vendor is basically getting delegated authority and so should be considered part of the exchange. So I think that what we're suggesting here is somehow the preliminary appeal process is not within the exchange, and I really think it is just from a structural standpoint.
For the record, Sean Hager. So just to a couple clarifications. That discussion there was meant to differentiate the difference between the Xerox Customer Service Center and the exchange. Xerox is part of the exchange, and so we should have been more specific that where do we stop the authority of the Xerox Customer Service Center and then forward appeals to the exchange staff or the exchange or state employees themselves. So basically what we have here is we have a customer service center, 30 to 50 employees. They have 3 appeals specialists that will be assigned to cases and will deal with appeals on a regular basis. So you go to the website, you enter your information, and the information comes back. The income is different from what you expected. Well, I disagree with that. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that is even an appeal. At that point, you would be required to submit information that says, this is why my income is different. You know, I was just laid off, and here's the proof that I was laid off, or something to that effect. So that isn't even an appeal at that point. What would be appealed is there is some kind of a determination that is against what you think is provided in your supporting documentation, that the process is flawed, stuff like that. Now, we are going to do our best to make sure that our rules are as objective as possible. But this is an implementation, and we're going to miss things. It's part of an implementation. So there will be points where things are a little ambiguous or the procedures weren't followed correctly. At that point, it goes to an appeals person at Xerox. And there, like we said, there'll be 3 appeals people at Xerox. So then the appeals process at Xerox will look at the information that they receive, and they will either uphold the appeal, uphold the decision of the eligibility team, or they will reverse it. If they uphold it and the person still feels that it is incorrect, that the decision that Xerox has made is incorrect, at that point it would go to a hearing which is beyond the scope of the Xerox team. At that point it would go to either exchange staff or this entity that we outsource this to. And there will be a hearing on it. Again, if there is a hearing, we will certainly be involved in that, whether it is with staff at the exchange or if it's outsourced. We need to understand what the appeals are, so we will be monitoring those closely regardless of where it stops. In a previous job, when we did an implementation, we had weekly meetings to discuss all of the issues that came up for enrollment, eligibility, things like that, and we monitored each of those cases to make sure that they were being handled properly. I anticipate that we will do the same thing here. So not only will it, if there's an appeal at the Xerox level, it doesn't mean that we're not going to be watching that. We're still going to be monitoring that. I want to make sure that's very clear. I think it's important that we monitor the issues that happen with Xerox and then beyond to the hearing level. With regards to an in-house hearing division or an outsourced division, number one, part of the discussion with the Department of Administration was, if we outsource it, they have the expertise of doing hearings. We don't have to train brand new people, and perhaps we hire somebody that has some experience, which is, obviously how you would intend to do it, but we still have to set up the processes ourselves. So, but if we outsource it, we get to utilize the procedures that are already in place, and we'll help define those procedures specific to the exchange. The other side of that is, if we are incorrect on the number of appeals that we have, if it's too many, we'll have to outsource the overflow anyways. If it's not enough, then we have staff not doing what they were hired for. Now, we'll keep them busy in some manner, so it's not, it wouldn't be completely wasted. But the whole idea is that they are hired to do hearings. And so part of the thought process behind outsourcing is that we utilize the expertise and we don't have staff that is not that's hired and not doing that job because we have set rules so precisely and so incredibly that we don't have any appeals, and then we've got 2 extra people working on staff. So that was kind of the decision process that we had. You are correct that we don't have costs for this, and we'd have to determine that. I guess we're kind of looking for the philosophy of the committee. And try to look at where to start focusing our efforts. It's difficult to come up with 2 complete parallel plans and only use one of those plans. So that was kind of why we brought this forward, to kind of focus our efforts.
Ms. Ellis?
TV Ellis for the record. I just want to make a comment and see if we can, if I understand the flow correctly of this whole process of particularly enrollment, which is when the appeals come in, when they get denial participation. And maybe understand for the question of brick and mortar and enough facilities to provide these services that we also need to consider working with our future partners, the navigators, which will have locations throughout the state and which will be the majority of the venue for enrollment of all this community of uninsured. When the denial is produced and they can become that facilitator of the initial, at least the initial filing of the appeals to whether it is Xerox or then further down when it escalates, if it escalates to the Department of or the exchange. So I think that we already have created tacitly that process where we don't have potentially the majority of clients seated at home trying to figure out how to do a video conference or a phone appeals or anything if we continue to partner that role with the future navigators throughout the state. And is that something that we have thought about it? I don't know, Mr. Hager.
Lynn Atkins, I think that's a great point. I was wanted to bring that up as well. Like, are the navigators going to be able to assist folks with appeals, filling out paperwork, or obtaining documents, scanning documents, faxing documents, whatever it is? I think it's an excellent point and something. I don't know if Mr. Hager or Mr. Bowden have any comments on that.
For the record, C.J. Bowden. Yes, the navigators, that is in their scope and in the responsibilities that we've outlined in the Navigator program to help with the appeals process and to lead the consumer in the direction that they need to resolve their appeal, whether that be an appeal with carrier or an appeal on eligibility decisions. The navigator is there and will be certified so they can help with those appeals processes. And I would say that they would probably be, for the people that go and sign up through a navigator, they're going to be the first line of appeal going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Downey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. I concur with the sentiments of Ms. Ellis and Ms. Atkins, and thank you for your response. I did have one further question, though, I forgot to raise earlier, and that regards, in terms of eligibility, Is there someone from the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services with us this morning, online or on the telephone or present up north? My question is this. The standard for eligibility, as I understand it, in the past it has been based on 2 years' previous reported income. I think there are difficulties that arise with that, and in order to provide further protections for consumers, and an application for Medicaid and or premium tax assistance should be based on current income. I think that reflects more accurately the economic situation we find ourselves in, and I would urge that that standard be adopted. Finally, I think Mr. Hager, thank you for your comments, and those of Mr. Bowden and what we've heard here. I believe this argues further for an issue I tried to raise at our last meeting, that the call center staff at the Xerox Center must be certified by the exchange in order to provide these services. Thank you.
Madam Chair, for the record, C.J. Bowden. I'd like to address the concerns there. The eligibility, we're going to have a single streamlined application. So there's going to be one application to fill out whether you're applying for a Medicaid benefit or for the exchange coverage and advanced premium tax credit. We don't have any leeway. The IRS has really defined how advanced premium tax credits will be issued and what the requirements are from your tax returns to get an advanced premium tax credit. Those are really codified and laid out very well. So we don't have the ability to move to a present income at this time, but that's where this first appeals process is going to come in and allow a person to show proof of a new pay stub or new earnings report that shows that they're at a different income level than they were on their past tax return. So we have the ability to move forward in that respect, and that would be an advanced premium tax credit appeal to address Mr. Downey's questions.
This is Amber. I have a question. Is now an okay time?
Of course.
Okay. Amber Joyner for the record. When I look at this cost on figure 1, right now I'm just personally leaning towards not reinventing the wheel. If we have a hearings process that appears to be working in the state, it seems to me that that would make sense to outsource it. But I guess my question would be, it makes sense that we don't have a summary of what it might cost. I think that would be very difficult to calculate. But can we assume that it would be less expensive than this? I guess I wouldn't want us to get into a situation where we were paying per case and then somehow ended up with a huge bill that was greater than this. Do we have any indication of whether it is less expensive to outsource or not?
Currently, all talks are very preliminary, but it would be on a per-case basis, and I don't have the figures on what that would be, but I can put those together if we decide to go in that direction.
Lynn Atkins for the record, and I think I might have brought this up yesterday when I was speaking with Mr. Hager. If somebody is denied the premium tax, the tax credit, thank you, or the subsidy, or they're not given as much subsidy as they think that they are entitled to, I mean, how far can the exchange go to change that decision? I mean, that to me seems like a decision that the federal government gets to decide. If ultimately someone is completely denied, let's just say for purposes of discussion, the tax subsidy, then, or the premium subsidy, then going through the appeals process through the exchange, I don't see how that's going to change that, unless we do make determinations and then give that information to the federal government and say, no, they really do deserve this and they're qualified for it, and change your opinion. I mean, I just think at some point the premium credits are going to be out of our hands. Is that not right?
At this point in time, for the record, C.J. Bowden, at this point in time, the advanced premium tax credit amounts are set by family size and modified adjusted gross income. When a person has a change, life change, or a change in circumstance, they can come in and ask for a redetermination of their premium tax credit. Our current eligibility engine will go out and use the information off of the federal data hub, come up with their initial decision. When they come in and show proof of a change in condition and a change in salary, we can input that proof and rerun eligibility to come out with a new advanced premium tax credit number. At this point in time, the exchange has redetermined the person's APTC and how much subsidy they will get to purchase health insurance. Moving forward from this point, it is going to be the individual's responsibility to, if they get another job and a promotion or they're earning more money, it's going to be their responsibility to re-report that and have their premium tax credit lowered again. Or at the next open enrollment, when they're signed up, it will automatically lower because there'll be new proof to go off of. If they do not, they're going to have to reconcile with the IRS at the end of the year, and the IRS has direct contact with the exchange if the person is in compliance with their advanced premium tax credit, if they owe money back, or how they're going to go forward with a new application for the following year's coverage. So after a decision is made, the exchange is not going to be held liable for making a wrong decision that's already come out in guidance from the federal government. The exchange is not going to be held liable at that point. It rests solely on the consumer and their reconciliation with the IRS. The consumers do have many protections with the IRS as well. If they receive, to make it simple, if they receive $4,000 excess tax credit and their income level is very low, they're only going to be required to pay back a portion of that. They won't be required to pay back the full $4,000, and they won't lose coverage going forward. There's a lot of nuances in that, so there's a lot of protections there as well.
So for new enrollees, though, let's talk about new enrollees. So for new enrollees, if the income is redetermined by the exchange and that information is submitted to the federal hub, what if that still comes back denied?
Well, the redetermination, for the record, C.J. Bowden, the redetermination will not come back denied because we've made the redetermination. We're going to get an initial determination from the federal hub, but once it's redetermined and we have proof from the consumer of the redetermined amount, that will move forward. We will be able to tell the IRS that is the tax calculation that we've come up with, and we're going to report that to the IRS.
Madam Chair, if I might. Just one item, I think. We don't get a determination from the federal data hub. My understanding is we will get specific elements of data from the federal data hub. For instance, we will get citizenship status from the Department of Homeland Security. We will get a modified adjusted gross income from the IRS, and a percent of the federal poverty level. We can adjust that to a percent of the federal poverty level. The determination actually comes from the eligibility engine and from the BOSS system, and so it's our determinations that determine whether or not you get a subsidy or not solely based on the information from the federal data hub, but if there is additional documentation that's provided, then we base it off of that information as well. Then we provide back to the federal government through our communications the subsidy level that has been provided to the individual. That's how the IRS knows how much subsidy that they've received, and they reconcile that during the tax year. They haven't released guidance on this, but I anticipate the exchange will be required to send a form similar to a 1099 to each individual that's received a subsidy so that they can reconcile those on their taxes at the end of the year as well.
Thank you. It only takes me a couple times, but thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Lewis?
No, my comment was that, so we actually make the determination, or the exchange actually makes that determination, as opposed to the federal government.
Mr. Mazzoni?
Dwight Mazzoni for the record. CJ, would it be possible, or John, to take what John just said and flowchart that in some way, shape, or form? I think that'd be helpful as a tool for us for future discussion, but also for navigators and for producers when they're out talking to a prospective client to be able to lay out what the steps are in simplistic form, if you will. I think that'd be very helpful for our efforts at this point.
For the record, C.J. Bowden will be happy to do that.
Any other questions at this time from our Northern Committee members?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have Tom McCoy. I have kind of a stream of consciousness, I guess. I think that as I listen to all this, I have to take into account the level of sophistication of the individuals that we're going to be dealing with primarily in terms of the new enrollees, the new insured who've never had insurance before. And I think this whole process of eligibility and so forth and so on is going to be very confusing, very difficult. I would assume, we talked about navigators, I would assume that also the producers would be in a position to assist a new insured in terms of the appellate process. We had talked before, and I think, John, you indicated that the goal was to be at this point, which is we put the information in, I'm working with a producer, I'm working with a navigator, and I get instant rejection. So, in effect, the appeal process could start at that moment. And that being the case, I think we have to be very careful in our education and training, both of producers as well as navigators, in this appellate process and how to deal with the level of sophistication that they will be working with. I've been involved in regulatory law and appellate process in my legal career, and even more sophisticated people don't understand it. So I think this is just a very, very important aspect of what this committee should be concerned with.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. I agree wholeheartedly. I think one of my concerns, I guess, is the list of things we're going to expect from the folks working at Xerox, and it's a long laundry list of a lot of things. Some complicated, some maybe not so complicated, but they really are going to have to be very well versed and very up to speed the minute open enrollment opens. So I express, or I concur with everything you just said. Mr. Downey. Mr. Mazzoni?
Dwight Mazzoni, for the record. In addition to my earlier request about a flow chart, I think this question was asked at one time, not quite sure how it came out. If someone we qualify somebody for earned income tax credit, that process of that money's being transferred to the carrier and everything else are between the IRS and the carrier somehow. I didn't get the idea it came through the exchange. I'd like to know if that's true or not true.
For the record,
Number two,
CJ Bowden, I
Go
can
ahead.
speak to that right now. Yes, the federal government will pay the carriers directly. The advanced premium tax credit will not flow through the exchange. Information on the cost and information on the advanced premium tax credit amount that the person receives will be directed to the exchange.
Second part of the question is, let's say I qualify for tax credit based upon my income today and 3 months from now, and if I heard you correctly earlier, we're going to ask that client whose income has now changed dramatically, let's say it goes up, to come back to the exchange and say my income has changed, so therefore I guess I'm going to lose my earned income tax credit. We're assuming, I guess, that the client's going to actually do that. So what happens now? How soon after the change in status happens is that earned income tax credit changed? Or is it in place for a whole year, or just till open enrollment? What's the criteria there? And I believe that also should be something that is added into my request for a flow chart, because again, this is something that the insured is going to want to know how they're going to have to pay for theirs. Is the exchange going to be set up in such a way? I'm assuming that when a change like that happens, somehow internally, instead of billing that insured person $200, now you're going to have to charge that person $300. There's probably has to be something set up to automatically trigger that when that change is made, I would think.
For the record, CJ Bowden, yes, it is upon the consumer's responsibility to report a change to the exchange on their income level if it changes dramatically up or down. Where it will come, they are eligible for the entire plan year, so it will go to the next open enrollment before the change would be found. But at that point, they're going to have to reconcile with the IRS when they file their taxes. And when they file their taxes and that new income comes in, that's going to be an automatic point of redetermination for them. We're still dealing with information that's about a year back, and they're still coming from the previous year's earnings. So it's a long process, but it is codified through the IRS, and the ultimate responsibility is on the consumer, not on the exchange.
For the record, John Hager. So one additional item, the carriers. This really won't affect the carriers. The determinations obviously will be made by the exchange. The individual will pay their portion of the premium. The information on the amount of the subsidy and the amount of the premium will go to the carrier, and they will receive that subsidy amount from the IRS based on the information that the exchange provides. That information will also go from the exchange directly to the IRS, from what I understand. The other part to that, though, is I think you're concerned about, well, what if it changes mid-year and the carriers don't know about it? The carriers don't have to know about it. They will be made whole by the fact that they received their entire premium either through a portion of the amount paid by the individual or the subsidy. If the IRS overpays the insurance organization because the amount of income was reported incorrectly, the IRS will not get that extra income back from the carrier. The IRS will get that information, or that amount back from the individual when they reconcile their taxes. So if a premium is $1,000 and based on their income level, the individual pays $200, the IRS pays $800 per month to the insurance company. Let's pretend we get information back that says, you know what, they should have been at $400 a month and the IRS should have only paid $600 a month. The IRS is not going to get those dollar figures back from the carrier, that $200 difference. The IRS will get that $200 difference back from the individual who has underpaid their premiums. So the carriers, once the premium has been paid, the carriers will not be concerned with that reconciliation. They will obviously have to make sure that their records match, that they get the appropriate amount based on what the exchange has provided. But again, the information flows from the exchange. The dollars are reconciled at the end of the tax year between the IRS and the individual, not the carrier.
Mr. Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. Thank you again for your remarks, Director Hager. I think it's going to be important. Let me speak, actually. First, we've been discussing the advanced premium tax credit, and there are safeguards there, and I think you've spoken concisely about how that will be reconciled should there be a change during the course of a year. However, many of our Nevadans will be on Medicaid, given their level of income. And I think we need to build in protections for them, such as those I delineated earlier in my remarks. But Mr. Mazzoni raises an important point. If there is a change during the course of the year, especially for those low-income individuals being assisted by our Medicaid program, it's important that they have an immediate right to appeal any change in status, any elimination of coverage based on reported income to welfare and supportive services, that they have an immediate right of appeal, and that benefits not be suspended until a determination has been finally made. I think that's an important protection to be added to our Nevadans who will be offered that assistance through Medicaid. And I really believe in terms of defining how to file an appeal and the processes we design to assist individuals, I really must emphasize those protections I alluded to earlier in my remarks, but also add to that especially for those on Medicaid, if someone is being redetermined and denied their Medicaid coverage in the course of a year, that until that appeal is finally resolved, services not be suspended.
For the record, John Hager, so we need to be clear. We have no authority over Medicaid here at the exchange. The appeals processes that are available at Medicaid will continue to be available at Medicaid. Those processes are in place now. They generally work. Obviously, at times we hear of situations where there might be problems, and they have a hearing process, as we discussed, that the welfare process hears those Medicaid issues and deals with them, and I believe about 3% of the hearings end up at district court. So there are processes in place for Medicaid. There are also enrollment periods so that if your income changes, my understanding is if your income goes down, you can go to Medicaid pretty much immediately. If your income goes up, you can, I think, remain on Medicaid for up to a year. I'm not positive of that, but I think that's close. So once you get the notice from Medicaid that you're no longer eligible for Medicaid, at that point you would get exchange coverage. Again, those appeals processes are done at the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services. They would not be done through the exchange. When an individual goes to the exchange to purchase coverage and we notify them that it appears that they are Medicaid eligible rather than exchange subsidy eligible, at that point the enrollment goes to Medicaid, and there are two different processes at Medicaid. There will be beginning January 2014. The first process is they've got the asset testing and all of the things that they do for the current group. You've heard of the woodwork effect. People that are eligible for Medicaid now have certain requirements. For those that are not eligible now, assuming if the state were to expand Medicaid eligibility to 100% or 138% of the federal poverty level, those additional individuals will be eligible based on the modified adjusted gross income test that is the same test that we provide for exchange subsidy eligible individuals. Even with those groups of people, once we determine that we think that they're eligible for Medicaid, we will send that information onto Medicaid, and they will have to make the determination regarding eligibility for Medicaid. So while we are the initial door to enter Medicaid and CHIP enrollment, those determinations have to be made by the Department of Welfare and Supportive Services and the Medicaid division. So I just want to make sure that's clear, the distinctions between that. One other item to make clear as far as appeals for eligibility, enrollment eligibility, that is very clearly an exchange function. However, when you get into appeals of claims, the carriers have very specific requirements for those items. Recently, the Affordable Care Act has changed the appeals process for all carriers. They are not allowed to have more than 3 levels of appeals, and those processes have to there are certain guidelines for how long those appeal processes can take. They can't take any longer than 90 days, 120 days, something like that for claims. A person who is having an issue with their insurance coverage has other ways that they can get assistance. For instance, they will still have GovChaw. GovChaw helps individuals that have claims appeals. They will still have the Division of Insurance. So those processes are in place for the claims appeals, and they really are outside the scope of the exchange. The exchange has the functions of enrollment and eligibility, not of the claims payment process. Now, that said, we will be monitoring insurance organizations on the overall statistics to make sure that they are quality programs. We have not yet defined in the Plan Certification and Management Committee what types of monitoring we will be doing. We're working on that right now. But the claims appeals are outside the scope of an exchange function. Again, we'll monitor it. We do want to know the overall statistics, the overall complaints. We'll be working with the Division of Insurance to make sure we have that data and understand what products are being sold on the exchange and how they are meeting those quality standards. But again, providing an appeals function in the exchange for claims is beyond the scope of the exchange.
Ms. Ellis?
TV Ellis for the record. I just have a comment, and although the process of appeal just for enrollment will be under the insurance exchange, for the population that we will be serving, which is the uninsured that probably never had insurance ever before, in their mind and in their eyes, at least at the beginning, until they experience enough of being insured, there is the exchange, basically the insurance policy in their mind, if you may, or the navigator. So they will come back either to the original navigator or to the exchange customer service for service denial or payment appeal or something like that. Although that will not be the responsibility of the exchange, I just want to make you aware that we will receive those calls and those inquiries, and so part of the training for both producers and navigators should include how we will respond, where do we send these clients that come to complain with wanting to appeal for these functions that are not under the scope of our job, because we will be in their mind their insurance.
And
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Hager. I'm sorry.
yeah, a follow-up to that. So in the plan for navigators, producers, and outreach specialists that this committee has forwarded to the board for approval, that plan includes those functions. So it's not that, I guess I should amend what I said before. We will not have responsibility for appeals for claims. The appeals themselves are outside the scope of the exchange. We recognize that we will get all sorts of questions. Brokers will get questions, navigators will get questions, our call center will get questions, and we need to make sure that they are trained appropriately to make sure that those claims appeals go to the appropriate organization. So that is part of the plan that's provided, that was recommended by this committee.
Thank you. At this time, I think what I'd like to do is start addressing the three requests that staff has that this committee decided today, and understanding. I think we're kind of making high-level decisions. We're not getting into the weeds on any of these. We're not looking or deciding what the appeal form is going to look like. I mean, these are really kind of framework issues, so staff can start working, and the board can make recommendations as well, and then staff can start working on how this process is going to work. So these are kind of higher-level items that we're going to go through. So if we could take item A at the moment, which says define the means by which consumer may submit an appeal to the exchange. I think the obvious recommendations were in person, online, by mail, by fax. I think the hang-up or the question at the moment is, could people actually just call in and file an appeal verbally on the phone? I think there's issues and problems with doing that. I think there's, signatures that need to have, documents that need to be submitted, and as much as I agree that we need to make it as broad as possible, I'd like to have a discussion about that personally. If anyone else disagrees with the other items, I think the other items are clear. But calling and saying, I file an appeal, and hanging up and feeling that you've kind of done your part, I don't think that's going to work. I think paperwork's going to need to be exchanged, signatures are going to need to be had, arguments are going to need to be made, and I mean that legally. So would anyone like to comment on any of that?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Mazzoni.
I just wanted to state that Bill DeLange of Xerox is here. If you would like to have a little brief discussion or a brief presentation on their current process, we can start with that and then go into yours.
That'd be great.
Good morning. Bill DeLange for the record from Xerox. You are correct. We can absolutely handle phone calls online. I think a decision that the exchange would need to make is, do we need all appeals in writing, or is it something that we can take by phone only?
Mr. Mazzoni?
I'd like to recommend that we have a process that would, Dwight Mazzoni for the record, excuse me. We have a process whereby an appeal could be initially created by phone, but I would be very remiss if we were not to document everything, particularly since this is such a new animal and since we have so many issues surrounding it with people that have never been in this process before. Hopefully there would be, from the producer and navigator side, a halfway decent attempt at educating the future consumers about these issues and what their steps are. Again, I go back to my favorite thing, let's do a flow chart, and let's, at least to the point of telling a consumer, here's your rights and here is how you can address them. And I believe a phone call follow up with whatever documentation is there then needed would be the best way to go. Thank you.
Ms. Ellis?
TV Ellis for the record. I think that item A, when we're talking about making appeals over the phone, kind of goes into item B. How far will the customer service department at Xerox will handle the phone call? Is it only receiving the call and giving a case number to the client? And then from there, what I'd like to know is, in the scope of the contract with Xerox, will they have an internal department to follow up on that case number and then process that case of appeal with the client directly? Or is it outside of the current contract and that needs to go to the exchange with a case number referral, then to the exchange to handle that particular case? So that's kind of my question. How far will Xerox go after the receiving of the call? Certainly receiving the call is not a problem. You receive a call, you assign a case number. This is just a standard in any industry of service. But who follows up with that case number and issues an evaluation or an investigation after the data or the information has been keyed in into that case? Is it Xerox or is it the exchange? And that goes into B. How far?
This is Bill DeLang for the record. To answer some of the comments, I agree that the call center should be handling all appeals coming in. What we're going to do, or what our plan is based on the exchange's approval, is to triage, you might say a kind of a tier 1 triage, and we will track all appeal questions that come in based on their case. Is this something that we can certainly handle and make a determination? We will. If it's something that we need to transfer to the division or to the exchange as a tier 2, we can certainly do that. But to Mr. McCoy's earlier concern about educating our 3 appeal specialists, that is a high priority for us to make sure that we are clear, concise, and we are handling each member with sensitivity.
Any questions from our committee members up north? I guess I have, so I agree with Ms. Ellis. I mean, I think someone could definitely make a phone call and initiate an appeal and maybe get a case number, but I'm assuming paperwork's going to have to either be mailed, faxed, or emailed to the consumer to then follow up and file the appeal. I guess what I don't want to suggest is that somebody gets to make a phone call and says, I appeal, and the phone call, and the call ends, and that's the appeal. So I think that's my only concern. I don't want consumers to think that phone call is the appeal, because there's going to need to be quite a bit of follow-up. Ms. Lewis?
Well, I mean, I think that in any case when the people file an appeal, there is some follow-up. If they appeal in person or if they appeal in writing, there has to be some follow-up. So I think that people should be permitted to file an appeal on the phone, and then, of course, there is follow-up. As we mentioned earlier, a case number would be assigned. They would be told what information they need to submit in order to continue their appeal. And, of course, the Xerox would look at their information also in that particular case to see whether or not the person has an issue. Oh, well, we obviously know the person has an issue, but whether or not it is a valid one.
Mr. Downey?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. I appreciate all the remarks, especially those by you, Ms. Ellis, and you, Ms. Atkins. And that was a good point you just made, Ms. Lewis. But I think telephonic initiation of an appeal is important, mainly because many clients, in my experience in contract administration and with Medicare, many clients don't understand that they have grounds for an appeal until a late date. And it's important that the telephonic initiation of the appeal process with due follow-up to proceed further down the line be available to them in order to meet timelines. And because if you miss that timeline, you have no grounds for an appeal. So I think it's extremely important we at least allow that option with due follow-up through the process.
At this point, I think, is there a motion on A to allow consumers to submit an appeal to the exchange in person, online, by fax, by mail, or via telephone?
Dwight Mazzoni for the record, so moved.
Is there a second?
TV Ellis for the record, second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Item B, scope of the customer service specialist. I know Ms. Ellis raised a couple comments about that. I think we've talked about that. I think we need some more discussion about it, and I guess I'm not sure, Mr. Hager or Mr. Bowden, how would we phrase the scope of authority, the level of appeal? What level of detail are you looking for in this?
For the record, CJ Bowden. On this point, Xerox is capable of handling about 90% of the appeals that are come into the exchange because their eligibility or advanced premium tax credit appeals at that point, and there's codified guidelines with where they are, what they're doing. Moving forward into a higher level of appeal, or a tier 2, as Mr. DeLange put it, is an appeal that is not normal to the exchange. It's not an appeal of eligibility or appeal of tax determination. It would be something that kind of comes out of left field that we see that we haven't dealt with before. That would need to be escalated. Once they gather the information, they could escalate that as a tier 2. We're looking at allowing, this recommendation would be to define the scope of allowing Xerox to handle all of the advanced premium tax credit appeals and eligibility determination appeals to the best of their ability until it is appealed further than Xerox. If they issue a determination and it's appealed up, then it would come to our staff to review.
Ms. Ellis?
TV Ellis for the record. I'm reading these requests for recommendation a little differently. It says here to define the scope of authority that will be given to the Customer Service Center appeals specialist to resolve appeals before it's escalated to the exchange. And when I read this, some burden of satisfaction needs to lay on the customer calling. So in my mind, if the customer is not satisfied with the initial appeals resolution that the Xerox customer service specialist provides, I think that needs to be escalated.
For the record,
That's what
CJ
we're trying to deter.
we agree, and I'm in agreement. It may be stated a little bit differently wording-wise, and that's the agreement. Xerox has the ability to take the appeal, make a determination, or do the research and make a determination on the appeal and issue that notice. If the person at that point is not happy, then that would immediately be kicked up to a hearing process with the exchange, because we've got to redetermine and we have to relook at that and find out why that appeal was not satisfied to the consumer's satisfaction. So I think we're kind of looking at it the same way. If Xerox can go through the eligibility and advanced premium tax credits, issue a first notice of decision at that point, if it's appealed, then it would kick up to the exchange.
Before we move forward on this one, I would ask if there's any public comment in Carson. Well, Ms. Joyner, Mr. McCoy, do you have any comment on this item at the moment?
I do, and I'll let Amber go first.
Oh, thanks. Amber Joyner for the record. So I'm getting involved in the vocabulary here. In our first one, when we were talking about how they may submit an appeal to the exchange, I just want to make it clear, I would like to see that the person does not need to go through Xerox to file an appeal if they believe if they've already gone through Xerox and they don't think that they've been satisfied. Because one of my most frustrating experiences as a consumer is when I'm told that in order to talk to a supervisor, I have to put it in writing and mail it somewhere. I think that the public needs to be able to also have a roundabout circumvent Xerox, because we don't know how this customer service is going to turn out. They need to be able to directly contact the exchange somehow. And I'm not sure if we satisfy that in A, we may have. But that would be my hope, is that there are multiple channels for people.
Just to follow up, I had a conversation with a representative from Xerox at the last meeting, after the committee meeting, just informally. And I'm going to raise my concern now because of this added responsibility on the customer service center process. It was indicated that 30, 35, somewhere in there, staff would take care of the call center, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., something like that, so roughly 3 shifts. And I think I made reference before, but I'll make reference again. I have a daughter that is a trainer in an insurance call center in another state. My wife has been in the call center business for 20 years in management. I asked them their thoughts, and they laughed. They said the wait time that would be involved in this process is going to be significant, and it's going to drive away potential signees. And so when we add this added element of the appeal process, I think it's going to be a very difficult maneuvering for the people that we want to get insured and into the system. So I throw that out only to suggest that I don't think they're staffing this adequately, and I'm concerned about the level of employee who will be the specialist. I'm assuming that's going to be a higher level in salary and responsibility, but that's not clear.
Mr. McCoy, thank you. I agree with those sentiments. Again, I think I've said this at the last few consumer assistance meetings. I've said it at the last couple of board meetings. I'm very concerned about capacity, and then all of the appeals that we're discussing that I know Xerox contracted for, at least to do this first level, and has committed and agreed that they would be doing this. I am concerned with capacity as well. When we're talking about 100,000 to 150,000 folks enrolling during that first open enrollment period, I worry as well. What I would like to do prior to us doing anything on this item, it's just the first time we've kind of talked about it, and want to see if there's any public comment in Las Vegas about this. And then we'll do Carson City, and then we'll do the telephone. I have someone coming down from Las Vegas. If you can please state your name and organization for the record.
Thank you. For the record, Barry Gold, Director of Government Relations for AARP Nevada. We do appreciate the subcommittee's concern that the appeals process be consumer-focused and consumer-oriented. You do have people that are entering something for the first time. It's like going to a restaurant for the first time. If you get bad consumer service, you're not going back. So we need to be really careful. Something that you talked about before was the navigators and the producers being involved in the appeals process, and we expect them to go there, but we want them to go there, but what is the expectation? And I'm not sure what the definitions are for the obligations for the navigators and the producers in terms of handling the appeals. It may be that they feel they should, but they don't have to. I've heard something, and I don't really know everything that I'm saying about this, but there are some producers that sell products but don't service products, and I don't really clearly understand what that means. It may mean if you get a car accident, they don't help you get it fixed, but we need to make sure that the navigators and producers understand what their obligations are in their role, since they are being paid to help sign people up. So I think that's important that we consider. The other thing I wanted to mention is you said that they could accept appeals by fax. Now, I wasn't here at that, and I apologize, I wasn't at the meeting where you discussed how people could enroll, whether it was by fax or not, but when I looked in this other document that talks about things that the committee has done, it doesn't say you could enroll by fax. So maybe that was discussed and there was some reason. So I was just kind of concerned why those two things were different there. Thank you.
Thank you, and yes, we are required to accept enrollees by fax. Are there any public comment in Carson City?
Bill DeLang with Xerox, for the record. Two comments I want to make, one regarding staffing to Mr. McCoy's. We do have our current plan to staff the call center appropriately. However, we're also looking at additional resources should we need it during open enrollment. The second point on appeals is we feel with our training, our advanced training for our appeal specialist, that they will be educated and well-trained to handle any appeals that come through above and beyond our customer service representatives.
Any public comment on the telephone?
Yes, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is John Sasser, representing Washoe Legal Services. Washoe Legal Services, along with the other legal services programs in the state, often represent persons who have been denied eligibility both through the welfare division system and through the Medicaid system. So we have a lot of experience with the due process issues involved in hearings and appeals. So a couple of observations. One, the first step in the process is a notice of adverse action, which is a document that tells the consumer why their application has been denied or why their services have been reduced. It's really important that that be both clear in terms of both the factual and the legal reasons for the denial or the reduction. Second, that it explain how to avail themselves of the appeals process, whether that's by fax or phone or whatever method you choose. Third, that you give them some information about where they might find assistance for representation. And the Welfare Division notices the legal services programs are listed with their addresses and phone numbers. So that's one possibility. The others would be navigators if they're going to help in this process. So give people an idea of where they can go to get some help. Once they have filed that appeal, then the first step sounds like it would be the pre-hearing step with Xerox. That does need to be adequately staffed. There needs to be an opportunity for the consumer to get their side of the story in, why they think either the legal or factual reason is wrong, before that first decision is made by Xerox. Also, it's mentioned, at least with Medicaid, and it will be true of this as well, if the decision is not to deny an initial application but to reduce service or to terminate service, it should be an opportunity to keep that service going pending the final decision of the appeals process. There's not a break in service. After the process through Xerox, then the next step would be the formal appeal either within the exchange or to the Department of Administration. The department, we have a lot of experience with the department. They do have good hearing officers and do a good job. At the end of that, there should be a written decision again with the clear factual and legal reasons for the decision. And I'd also encourage you to consider the possibility of judicial review, which is done with all the other state agencies. That would require legislation at the next session, but I hope you would recommend that. And there's good model legislation with the Welfare Division and with Healthcare Financing and Policy. So with that, I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sasser. Are there any other public comment on the phone? I have one comment I wanted to make right now related to what Ms. Joyner said, which is we did agree on item A, how consumer files an appeal, but I guess once they are unhappy with the decision that, as we're discussing here, is going to come from Xerox, how then does that get escalated? Who escalates that? I agree with Ms. Joyner. I think one of the most frustrating things in a lot of whether it be government programs or whether it be private businesses, is that there are so many hoops to go through, so many forms to fill out, so many notices to file, that we certainly do not want to become that. And so once, if a consumer is unhappy with the result from Xerox, how does that get to the exchange? Is that some other appeal process? What's the thought there? I don't know if Mr. Hager or Mr. Bowden have a comment on that.
For the record, C.J. Bowden. At this point in time, we need to address that completely, but the one possibility would be to have an additional address, telephone number for the exchange. They could call the exchange directly, or Xerox can forward them directly to our exchange staff as soon as they're not happy at that point.
For the record, John Hager, we don't want to create any additional barriers to consumers. We need to make sure that the consumers are taken care of. However, the procedures and the paperwork, or the hoops that you call them, that are created by organizations They protect the organization from excessive cost, and so we have to balance that. At some point, a person is complaining to complain. They don't like the situation, but all of the procedures have been filed. So I think we need to go back and look at the processes that the Department of Admin has and the Department of or Division of Welfare and Supportive Services has. Come back with a plan that is a little more granular for the committee's consideration, and provide that here. I'm concerned that every time we make it easier, it is going to add cost, and so we need to balance that. I'm not saying that we don't want to take care of our consumers by any means, but we need to consider both sides to that.
I've got everyone here wants to chat right now. Ms. Ellis.
TBLS for the record. I just want a point of clarification from the representative of Xerox. Did I hear right that you will have two types of employees servicing our customers? One will be the customer service at the call center and another type of employee, an appeals specialist. And if so, then would they be a phone tree, dial 1 for customer service, push 2 if you have been denied, push 3 if your claims are not being paid, and so forth, which that in a way resolve our concern of capacity. There's going to be two departments handling these calls, at least from the appeals or complaints department. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill DeLang with Xerox for the record. That's something that we still need to work out as far as internal processes. Would one phone call come into a customer service representative and then transfer to an appeals specialist, or would there be the phone tree to an appeals specialist directly? And that's something we still need to work out to make it a better flow for the consumer.
Mr. Mazzoni.
Dwight Mazzoni for the record. While I appreciate all the discussion about all these different appeals, I would point out that everybody's adding layer upon layer, because we've got insurance company, because not everything that happens, particularly I think several people have mentioned a claim being appealed. If a claim is appealed, I would assume that would go directly to the insurance company unless it was a violation of some statute or some aspect of the exchange. We have the exchange that we're talking about now. We have federal government appeal process. There's a state government appeal process. We have a judicial process. There also is binding arbitration and ADR process. So we probably have something between 3 and 7 levels of appeal here that we're trying to work on. I would suggest we try and look at this and simplify it rather than add more and more levels of appeal. If you want a consumer who's uneducated in this area to do something, and I agree with anybody that said this, we better make it as easy and as simple as possible. Preferably one phone call, one meeting, whatever, to start the process, and then someplace between Xerox and Mr. Hager's office and the insurance company and the navigator and the producer need to be involved in where this goes next, because quite honestly, we are not going to give any headway to anybody who's, quote, the consumer who comes in and doesn't know anything, trying to walk them through without having someone holding their hand. So I think we need to keep in mind that we've got already on the books several layers of appeal that are available. We probably need to be more educated about what those layers are and how they work. And we need to, I think, further define within the exchange, what is it that we're going to actually be able to look at? Are we going to look at every single thing that someone has a complaint about? Or are we going to be able to, if you will, hand it off to the appropriate service facility, insurance company, or whatever within this process? Because the last thing I don't think Mr. Hager wants to have is a staff of 75 or 80 people just because we have a really good appeals process. Thank you.
Lynn Atkins, for the record, 2 comments. One is I guess it seems to me that the contract for Xerox has been signed and that there's at least one level of appeal that they have been asked to perform. It would seem to me that they kind of get one chance to fix whatever issue there is with the consumer, and then it goes to the exchange. That's kind of where my head is going at the moment. But I just kind of want to... There's been discussions about, I think Mr. Hager discussed earlier, that if there's a change in income or there's information that needs to be updated, I want to make sure that we keep very, very close tabs on what's happening at Xerox regarding things that just need to be amended or changed. If you could indulge me for just a moment, I think what we've seen over the course of the last few years with the foreclosure crisis is the banks had been overwhelmed with requests for loan modifications, all things related to their loans, and consumers were consistently asked to submit the same sort of paperwork time and time again because documents were lost, caseworkers were changed, and just lots of things kind of went wrong at that first level where it wasn't even really an appeal. It was just wanting to have your information viewed appropriately. So I guess I still want to make sure, and I'm not sure how this will be done, that the first level of, not even an appeal, the first level of assistance with Xerox, again, if people say I have amended information or different information about my income, that there's some sort of time frame that Xerox needs to resolve those issues and handle those issues, and anything that goes beyond that time frame gets kicked to the exchange to review. I just don't, what I don't want to hear is consumers saying the exchange has called me, even though it may be Xerox, has called me 4 or 5 times for the same paperwork. I'm having the same conversation, and it's an incredibly frustrating experience. So I just say that as a heads up on when companies or organizations get overwhelmed with numbers of requests.
Madam Chair, this is Amber.
Thank you. Yes, Amber.
I just had a quick question. Actually, I'm recalling from months ago something that may be answering my own question regarding how people may be able to, because within Xerox, I am still concerned that there will be a disincentive for them to escalate it. There needs to be a way for consumers to escalate it themselves. They hang up the phone with Xerox and they say, I'm still not happy, and that person wouldn't get me the supervisor I wanted. And I like the idea of a 1-800 number. I appreciate the concern about cost, but I'm wondering if, I recall at some point we were going to have an ombudsman. Is that an employee of Xerox, or is that somebody who's employed by the exchange? And maybe that's the solution I'm looking for, but some way to have multiple avenues for an appeal.
For the record, C.J. Bowden. Ms. Joyner, I believe that GovChaw was the proposed ombudsman to help people through the relationship with the carriers and with the advanced premium tax credit and things like that during the beginning. At this point in time, staff can look at, that really kind of comes down to see as if the committee would like to look at an in-house hearings division, which would be your immediate call around Xerox, or if we want to look at contracting out to another state agency.
For the record, John Hager, I would like to point out that in addition, if this were in-house, this hearings officer and administrative assistant are going to fall under a quality assurance officer. And we do have that as a decision unit in our budget to add the quality assurance officer and a benefits manager for the benefits manager is specific to the carriers and the quality of the carriers. The quality assurance officer oversees both consumer complaints and the carrier quality. So that might be that branch in the exchange might be a method for overseeing escalated complaints. They would also be responsible for the hearings if those are outsourced, for the general management of those hearings.
At this time, I would ask if the committee agrees that we table this matter till the next subcommittee meeting. I think we have a lot of very good questions. I think staff maybe has heard some things that maybe we can get some more information about. So if could I? Yes, it looks. Do we need a motion on that?
Yes.
Oh, we do need a motion on that. Could
Madam
somebody
Chair, move to table this till our next meeting, please. Item B, sorry.
Is there a second?
I second the motion. Lavon Lewis for the record.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So, Mr. Hager and Mr. Bowden, was there enough of the discussion for you guys to kind of try and answer some of these questions to get a little bit more information for our next meeting?
Absolutely. It always helps to get additional opinions. It's difficult to do this the first time with just a couple of people and some research with in-house. So we appreciate all the opinions and ideas from the committee, and we'll look at those. We've got a lot of notes here between the two of us to come back with a more full report.
Thank you. And I think if we could take about a 5-minute break before we get to item C. Is that all right?
Yes.
11:15.
We don't have enough information. Oh.
Are we ready to get going? I'd like to call this meeting back in session. And I think we were going to just start discussing item C, provide the board with a recommendation to build a hearing department within the exchange or contract with an existing agency that has the capacity to discuss the exchange's hearings. I think we heard before that staff would just like some direction on where we think we might be headed with this, understanding we haven't figured out all the details about anything, and we're still trying to do very high-level framework for this. So that being said, Ms. Joyner and Mr. McCoy, do you have any comments on this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Tom McCoy for the record. I want to say at the outset, I am not a NFL replacement referee, but I have reversed my opinion starting out this morning when we first, CJ went through the discussion. I think what we've done in B, even though it's been tabled, is convinced me that the best approach is to have this in-house within the exchange. I think there's too many opportunities for quality assurance, as John has talked about, but also the ability for the exchange, which has the statutory responsibility for all this mess, to be able to work and observe what goes on with Xerox, with providers, et cetera, in the claims process, in the appeals process, and also engage with the Department of Insurance, carriers, and so forth. I think we've established a need for the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange to have its own people to handle the appeals process.
Any other committee comments at the moment? Ms. Ellis?
T.B. Ellis for the record. I actually am not comfortable with making a decision right now. I think that our other fellow board member in the North brought an important point on the cost to outsource this, whether it is comparative setting up inside versus outsourcing it cost per case. I like to see a cost analysis of the two options before I will consider any decision at all.
Lynn Atkins for the record. Mr. McCoy, I'm going back and forth too. I mean, I think it sounds like the Department of Administration or another state agency might have a lot more capacity currently built in that we could leverage, and that you have folks who are trained and have been doing this. And I believe, and I don't know if we kind of know the status or the quality or the efficiency or the happiness when people have their appeals there. I wonder, what the experience is like. But then I also agree with what Mr. McCoy says, and kind of the things that I've been bringing up in all the other committee members is control, and really kind of having our arms around this entire new process. And I don't know how much control we would have over it if we contracted out to another state agency. So those are just some thoughts. Anyone else have thoughts? Ms. Lewis?
LaVon Lewis for the record. Well, it appears that to build if we end up with, as identified in the document, only 6 to 9 appeals per month, that would end up with this hearing department. That seems to be a fairly large department just to handle those few appeals. So I am also torn as to whether or not we want to build a department to handle appeals within the exchange, handling so few appeals. Now, of course, if we're going to be looking at, a larger percentage of the estimated 65 appeals that are expected per month, then it would be, worthwhile to have a department in-house. But if we are only going to get even up to 15 a month, that might be costly. So I'm torn.
Mr. Hager or Mr. Bowden, can we get the figures again? We're assuming, is it 100,000, 150,000 during open enrollment, and that open enrollment is 5 months or 6 months?
For the record, CJ
The first
Bowden.
open enrollment.
The first open enrollment is 6 months. It's from October 1st to March 31st of 2000.
And we're anticipating 150,000 people signing up during that?
145,000 people during the first open enrollment, and 200,000 during the further open enrollment long term.
That's without
So
Medicaid
if we can do
expansion.
if we can do the first open enrollment period, then so for 6 months, 140,000 people. I'm looking for my calculator on my iPad at the moment.
At the
Can
point,
someone do-
what we have,
Daily.
the exchange could expect approximately 65 appeals per month in the first year and approximately 90 appeals per month in the long term.
Right, and those are calculations we're coming up with, but can we do can someone, oh, here we go. Okay, so, come on here. So 140,000 divided by how many days in 6 months? 365, so 180 days. Oops, sorry. This is why I don't have Mr. Hager's job. Divided by 180. Okay, so that's 777 people signing up for the exchange a day. I continue to just be astonished with our appeal estimates and how low they are. And seriously, and if we are correct that how low they are, this will be the model for every agency out there ever, and I am proud working with it, but I'm going to be even more proud. I just think that is, I think the word I used before is very naive and just not based in reality. I just think there's going to be a lot of startup issues, just things that come up that are going to take a lot of time from the Xerox people at the beginning, a lot of hand-holding, even with our outreach specialists, our navigators. So if we're talking for that first 6 months period, 777 new exchange members a day. Mr. Mazzoni?
Dwight Mazzoni for the record. Mr. Hager, do we have any demographics, figures, facts, realities of any other within the state of Nevada, state organization and or private organization that can lend any credence to whether, first of all, that seems like a whole heck of a lot of people to be enrolling unless we have an army of people that I'm not aware exist out there to enroll people, enrolling people into the exchange. Secondarily, what about organizations in the state that do have an appeals process or a center? How many are they seeing? How many does welfare, does Medicaid? I mean, do we have any information at all that lends credence to either the figures we're looking at or gives us something else to look at or whatever? I'm a little concerned that we're kind of shooting in the dark here.
For the record, John Hager, so a couple of things. First of all, we will, for the next committee meeting, we'll have a report from Xerox regarding their call center and their capacity and how they plan on dealing with the capacity. And we expect that it will refer to their experiences for other enrollment processes. Second of all, the figures that we provided here were based on the number of appeals per month that the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services receive. Again, the chart team deals with an average of 400 to 500 appeals, and I believe 3% of those are actually sent to hearing. So that's where we got those numbers from. I will say that it was basically spread out over 12 months. So we might need to take another look at that and kind of give a better estimate for open enrollment. But if you're talking 6 months as opposed to a year, you could double it. And again, overflow for our capacity to handle appeals would go to the hearings division or an organization that we outsource to. We're going to have an overflow safety net set up. I would like to bring back further detail to the committee on this at a later date, a more refined plan to make you more comfortable with this. not just on the types of appeals. We actually have a report from one of our consultants regarding the eligibility determinations and eligibility special enrollment events. So I think we need to come back with a more complete plan to help this committee make an informed decision.
Madam Chair, given the information provided, I would suggest we table this until we have more information in front of us. Any discussion at this point in time will be superfluous. Motion? Table item C, excuse me.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? And I would like to ask anyone anyone listening on the telephone or in the audience, I'm not going to open this up to public comment since we are not voting, and I know I did open item B to public comment, which I think helped us decide also that we actually need to table it. So at the next committee meeting, please either submit your comments in writing, or we will have open it to public comment on these issues at that time.
Madam, for the record, John Hager, I just wanted to note that for the record, the second was made by Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. And I believe Ms. Ellis had one comment to make, maybe about information for next meeting on this issue.
TV Ellis, for the record, I'd like to request, we were talking about the numbers of potential appeals, about 65 a month, based on a second tier of the appeal once it goes to a department. But I believe Mr. Hager just said that they were receiving over 400 initial calls, that those ended up being 65. Well, when we're talking about capacity and receiving potential appeals calls, we need to talk about those potential 400 or whatever that percentage is. So I like to see that percentage apply to the perceived number of new enrollees per month during that open period of 777. What does that percentage mean on the initial calls? So if we can get that information next meeting with the additional other information that we need to receive, then that would be great. It will help us a great deal. Thank you.
Madam Chair, for the record, John Hager. So the information regarding those percentages are all provided on page 2 and going through page 4. The 400, 500 appeals per month for welfare are for 5 different programs, of which only 30% are Medicaid eligibility. Medicaid eligibility is, there are approximately 330,000 Medicaid enrollees, and so the number of appeals was based on the exchange population of 145,000. So the math is all provided in this report, but we will provide it again in the report with the more refined information.
Mr. Downey, or I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis, and then Mr. Downey.
But I think the number you are quoting, or let me ask, the number you are quoting are for Medicaid is actually the number of Medicaid enrollees, and of that number, then they are getting whatever the other number was of the appeals, 130 a month or something like that. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Hager?
Yes. So out of 400 to 500 appeals that are received by chart, 30% are Medicaid. So 30% of 500 is about 150, 144, 160 hearings. Excuse me, that's 12 to, let me go back here. Multiply that 400 to 500 by 30%. Then based on the number of hearings that the administrative adjudications team conducts per year, approximately 12 to 15 hearings per month. So that's for all categories. So 12 to 15 hearings per month based on the enrollment, and then down to so at the bottom of page 4, so 500 monthly appeals at welfare, of which 30%, 150 are Medicaid appeals. The exchange could expect approximately 65 appeals that would be dealt with in the Xerox system. That's 150 Medicaid appeals times 145,000 exchange enrollees divided by 330,000 Medicaid enrollees. And then based on that information, if we triple the number of appeals per month that welfare receives, we get 6 to 9 appeals per month. So that's where we came up with those numbers. We've tripled the number of appeals that the hearing division gets within welfare.
But most of the welfare appeals are from people who are already enrolled in the program. I mean, is that the case? Not trying to enroll. For instance, I think, are we talking apples to apples here? Are we talking apples and oranges? We're going to be seeing most of our appeals initially, anyway, from issues surrounding enrollment, and not whether or not, they are going to get covered for a heart transplant or whatever may be happening with Medicaid enrollees. I think that we may be looking at a different population.
For the record, C.J. Bowden. At this point, when I did the interview with the DWSS staff, this was for new enrollees into the Medicaid system and continual cases that go on during the year. So this would be congruent to the exchange population with new enrollment and continuing enrollment. It would actually be closer to the exchange condition in the second year of operation because you would have a lot of long-term as well as new enrollment.
Lynn Edkins for the record. Is it possible to get that separated then so we could get an idea if we could just pull out what that enrollment number is and the number of appeals from enrollment? I don't know, maybe, I don't know if that would help us with this first open enrollment period, which is only going to be dealing with enrollment.
At this point in time, that was the most detailed information. I've met with 3 different people at the DWSS hearings unit, and that was the most detailed information that I could get on their tracking of claims.
Mr. Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. I think the figures we're discussing, I'd like to follow up with what Ms. Lewis was raising, the issues raised there and those raised in terms of capacity by Ms. Atkins. If we look back at the most closely approximate event, which will resemble what we're looking at in open enrollment in terms of appeals and the like, we need to look back 6 years to when Medicare Part D rolled out. And I think I would ask the Director Hager or Mr. Bowden, as you prepare information to come back, to bring back to us, you go back and visit with those in GovCha and or the Medicare SHIP program who can give you a better idea. I think you'll find the figures are very low that you're estimating. You're dealing with a situation last 4 or 5 years that, even though troubled waters have been fairly serene, however, you're dealing with an initial new program, very heavy initial enrollment. I think you're going to see a much larger number of initial appeals in terms of eligibility, and we need to build the capacity in the support program in order to deal with that.
Thank you. Before we close this item completely, Ms. Joyner or Mr. McCoy, do you have any further comments or requests from staff?
No, I just think that the issue that Mr. Downey has raised and others, we need to compare the universe that we're dealing with, and I think the overwhelming impact of, say, 150,000 people is not being factored in on those estimates that we had in the report.
Thank you. With that, we will go to agenda item 6. Mr. Hager or Mr. Bowden?
For the record, C.J. Bowden. Agenda item 6, web brokers in the exchange. The purpose of this report is to provide information regarding participation, roles, and requirements for web brokers in the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange. The Consumer Advisory Committee has recommended to the board that brokers and agents should be allowed to enroll individuals in product offerings in the exchange. Some brokers, web brokers, enroll individuals in insurance primarily or entirely through a web-based system developed by the organization. Use of web-based systems other than the exchange creates unique challenges that require separate determination regarding participation of web brokers. For a little background, web brokers, also called private exchanges, have enrolled over 3.75 million consumers in health insurance plans since their inception. That may not be their current enrollment number, and it's not their current enrollment, but since their inception, they've enrolled 3.75 million people in coverage in the U.S. They could assist the exchange in meeting enrollment targets However, regulatory and technical requirements are complex. Moving into the implementation requirements, a lot of this is very laid out. It's codified in the blueprint and it's set up directly. 45 CFR 155-220 allows the exchange to determine if web brokers will be allowed to participate in consumer enrollment in qualified health plans and the advanced premium tax credit. If web brokers are permitted to participate in offering QHPs through the exchange, there are several key issues that must be considered. The exchange final rule requires that web brokers must meet all standards for disclosure and display of QHP information that is required for the exchange. Allow consumers to view all QHPs offered through the exchange, not offer financial incentives for enrollment, such as rebates or giveaways. They must display all QHP data that the exchange provides. They must maintain audit trails in an electronic format for at least 10 years. And they must allow consumers to withdraw from the web broker's enrollment process at any time and go over to the exchange portal and use the exchange's portal instead. Additionally, 45 CFR 155-220 requires that all agents and brokers comply with an agreement with the exchange under which brokers must register with the exchange before assisting individuals to enroll, receive training in QHP options and insurance affordability programs, and comply with the standards concerning privacy and security of personally identifiable information that apply to the exchange and the agents or brokers. So the requirements for web brokers are identical to what we're going to require and what DOI requires our current producers to obtain to be on the exchange. We're going to have to go out with these companies and provide the same training, the same licensure, and the same certification that our current producers have. If the exchange determines it will allow web brokers to enroll individuals in QHPs offered and the advanced premium tax credit, the exchange final blueprint further requires a clear definition of web brokers and the role of web brokers, evidence of web brokers' compliance with the regulations, agreements with web brokers registration with the exchange, training on QHP options and insurance affordability, which will be the same as we provide current producers, compliance with the exchange's privacy and security standards, a process to verify that web brokers comply with state law, and that the exchange maintains a policy for ensuring web brokers' compliance with the remainder of regulation. Information regarding how the exchange will ensure that web brokers are appropriately trained, information regarding how the exchange will ensure web brokers meet the privacy and security standards. These are all repeats, but they're laid out specifically in the blueprint, and we have to provide that by November 16th to the federal government. Information regarding how the exchange's website will interface with web brokers' website. At this point, we've become very complicated, and I'm going to read through these, but there's a couple of pipelines that have to be followed, and this information has to flow securely from point to point, and the consumer has to be able to see the information the same on each site. The web broker must securely transfer the consumer's information to the exchange's website so that the consumer's eligibility for advanced premium tax credit can be calculated by the exchange. It won't be calculated by the web broker. They're going to enter information, transport it to our exchange portal. It's going to be re-entered through a web service. Then it's going to go out to our eligibility engine, bring back that determination, and then the exchange must securely transfer the amount of advanced premium tax credit and cost sharing reduction back to the web broker site so that the QHPs can be displayed correctly on the web broker site. At first, they're not going to have any of the cost sharing information, so they're going to be just standard costs on all of the QHPs that are offered on the web broker site. Once this information comes back and is transmitted to the site, then their site has to process the information and readjust all of the costs on the web broker site so the consumer knows what they're looking at. At that point, the consumer can look, choose, and select a QHP. Their selection information must be transferred back to the exchange's website through a call service. At this point, the exchange must enroll the consumer in the QHP with the carrier. Web brokers cannot enroll a person with the QHP through the exchange. The exchange has to enroll them in the QHP. So all this information has to come back yet again. Then the enrollment notification must be sent back for display on the web broker site. The Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services and the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight have not yet issued the requirements for how this architecture is going to be assembled or what it has to look like. But we're dealing with some very important information, including identifiable tax information, federal tax information, and that all has a lot of security risks around it. So web brokers have the ability to bring more people into the exchange, but we don't know what requirements we're going to have to provide for web brokers to hook up to the exchange in a secure manner. Costs associated with this. The staff has consulted with Xerox Healthcare LLC regarding structure and costs associated with web broker participation in the exchange. Xerox is unable to give a cost figure or architectural details until the federal regulations are solidified. Federal funding is available through December 2014. Therefore, if the exchange was to delay implementation of the web broker requirements for 1 year, the cost could still be paid within the establishment grant funds. The exchange could also require that web brokers pay for system enhancements and maintenance that would allow for their participation. From this report, staff recommends to the committee to make a recommendation to the board regarding whether web brokers will be allowed to enroll consumers in QHPs on the exchange and the advanced premium tax credit and cost sharing reductions. And if the committee determines web brokers will be allowed to participate, or make a recommendation to the board regarding whether implementation of the requirements for web broker participation will be delayed.
Madam Chair, if I might follow up on that a little bit. So basically, we have our rules engines, our eligibility engine. We've got our web portal that will be on top of that. That will be the outer face of the exchange on the web. So an individual will be able to go to our website and insert information. If we allow web brokers to participate, it is an additional layer on top of that that allows an individual to go not only to our website but to other brokers' websites to input information into their site, and then there'd be a data connection we'd have to build between our site and the web brokers, the web-based brokers' website, to allow them to do all the functions that they can do on our exchange. So the biggest question that we've been struggling over is, well, why allow it if we already have ours? The whole idea behind allowing a web-based broker to participate is to take advantage of the footprint that the web-based brokers already have. And so the decision has to be, does it make sense for the exchange to access that footprint that the web brokers have and utilize that base, or do we make it simple and just stick with the BOSS system that has been developed by Xerox? There's costs, there's benefits, and that's what we're providing to the committee today. Obviously, we don't have the cost of developing those interfaces, and again, those could either be paid for by establishment grant funds or by the brokers who intend on utilizing the service.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. I'll take questions from the committee. It sounds very complicated. It sounds costs are unknown. And I would just generally say that we're still trying to figure out how the exchange is going to work and the details of the exchange, that this seems like it would be taking on a whole nother beast if we did that right now. So those are just my general thoughts. Ms. Ellis?
TV Ellis for the record. I went further and read the attachment file for the study for the web-based brokers. And what I see their role, if any, it's not as an enroller or producer, but more as an education and a referral source. So getinsure.com could very well have an icon to the exchange or to the navigator database or to the brokers database, the producers database in the state that are going to be servicing this community, but not themselves become a producer or a navigator to enroll in the program. So if we want to be generous at all or take advantage of their web traffic, because getinsure.com has something like 200,000 people going through their website every month, sure, we can catch a few people there, but they would not to allow them. I will be extremely careful to include them in this process, as complex as it has been, and just let them be a referral source, if anything. That's my 5 cents.
Mr. Downey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. I'm kind of torn as to whether we should allow or just delay their participation. I have some problems. I mean, I welcome every source of information. I think it's a good idea. However, the proprietary websites currently in operation often offer inaccurate information. It's been proven to be the case, especially those looking for Medicare coverage, and I don't see why that would be. No one's shown me that it would be different looking for exchange. I think we should require people offering assistance in the exchange to rely upon the web portal. Our work in progress, and I quote directly, "This is the cornerstone of exchange access, and all purchasing traffic will be routed through the exchange website." There's some problems besides inaccuracy. These websites don't show complete coverage. They steer, in effect, to certain companies, and I think that needs to be avoided as a consumer protection. Many of these websites and the brokers who utilize them will steer people to extra coverage beyond what they might be looking for in the exchange. I think that presents problems we really must avoid. And finally, I've been concerned that the so-called footprint these web portals represent must be quite small. Otherwise, how do we explain we have 550,000 uninsured Nevadans currently here? I don't think the figures that have been quoted are nationwide. They're certainly not Nevada specific. I would challenge anyone who would claim they were. So for these reasons, I think I would recommend with misgivings that we turn them away and require all brokers and navigators to rely upon the exchange web portal. But if nothing else, we could at least delay their participation.
Mr. McCoy, Ms. Joyner, any comments?
Go ahead, Mr.
Go ahead,
McCoy.
Amber.
Go ahead. You deferred to me last time. Thanks.
Okay, I won't defer this time. The only question I had, and we have a representative from the Department of Insurance, is just wondered what experience we've had in Nevada. I agree with comments that we just heard from Mr. Downey. We don't have Nevada numbers specific in this report, so I really don't have a handle on that. And then also, CJ, maybe the level of interest that has been ascertained by the staff using the web-based. Is there real interest out there?
At this point, it's very hard to say. When this report was compiled, it can be noted that one of the local web-based brokers that is based in Nevada refused to give any information to the report.
Madam Chair, Amber Joyner for the record. I agree with Mr. Downey with his comments. I'm very much leaning against allowing them in the exchange. I think that from a education and messaging perspective, all along I think we've been trying to say if you want a subsidy, you have to go through the exchange. And to complicate that, I think is poor customer service. I think it would be confusing to people. And as far as the people who are currently using those web-based services, I'm not concerned about them from a consumer access point of view because they're web savvy. I mean, to tell them this was your old website, here's your new website is not going to be a learning curve for them. I'm really concerned about the confusion and the messaging to the rest of the consumers who may accidentally wind up on one of those sites and not realizing that they're not dealing directly with the exchange. I think the customer service levels will be different, and that's really concerning to me.
Mr. Mazzoni?
Dwight Mazzoni for the record. Experience in Nevada is very limited. However, those carriers, and I notice they're not listed here, that do receive a number of hits, if you will, through Esurance, to further complicate the issue, the people that buy through eSurance for one particular carrier, and I can talk about that privately or however it needs to be done, what they tell us is they get a nice block of business that comes through eSurance. The other aspect of it is those people are constantly calling the carrier for service. So the web-based programs do not provide the level of service I think we're looking for, as much as I wish they did. In looking at the 5 programs that are listed here that PCB did, I don't think this is really as representative as it could be or should be. And I noticed that eSurance is not on here. There's a number of programs that aren't on here that maybe should be looked at in more detail to see what their market actually looks like in Nevada. I would hate to just arbitrarily push this part away right now. I think it needs more research, like many other things we've done today. I would agree that if it's a source of possible participants in the exchange, there might be some benefits for it. But the downside is I don't want to take on something bigger that we can't handle with complaints and or just flat out service work for people that enrolled through eSurance, for instance. Not picking on them, just they're one of the people out there. Thank you.
Mr. Hager and Mr. Bowden, when would be the last time we would be able to, because what I don't want to do is table this like to next meeting. I don't want this to keep coming up. I would rather either resolve the issue or one way or the other, or if we're going to table it for 9 months or something at a much later time when we have more information and, I don't know. So what's the latest, I guess, if we wanted to table it, that we could table it, make some decisions, and if we decided to implement it, use federal funding?
For the record, CJ Bowden, at this point in time, unless we made a decision to move forward, at this point in time, we need to make the decision today to move forward with web brokers. If you want them on board for open enrollment at 2014, it has to be posted in the blueprint and all of the requirements filled out and checkmarked in the blueprint if web brokers are to be able to sell QHPs on the exchange in the first plan year. If not, it could be tabled to another point. We could implement later in 2014 and still use federal grant monies to implement that, or at this point in time, if they want to participate at a later point, the web brokers could pay for their hookup to the exchange and the costs associated with that as well. So those are 3 different options.
LaVon Lewis for the record. Madam Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we not allow web brokers to participate in the process in the exchange.
Is there a second?
I move.
Second. Amber.
And Madam Chair, there's some public comment as well, if you'd like to.
Thank you. I'll take that now. Appreciate it. In Carson City? And if anyone in Las Vegas would like to make public comment, and then we will also take it from the phone. Carson City?
Good morning. My name is Elisa Caffaretta, and today I am speaking personally. If we were at the legislature, I'd take off my blue badge and tell you I'm speaking on behalf of relatives who are insurance brokers or are in this industry. And I'm a little surprised that I'm saying this. But I'm very concerned that there are 5 companies that have been identified that provide this service in Nevada, and yet you have no public testimony whatsoever from any one of them. And I always say, I usually have one Republican moment a week, and this is my Republican moment. Although I don't think it has anything to do with party. But I think one of the things that involving the web brokers might do is they're already providing this service and this interface online, and certainly have lessons learned and could provide some expertise to the process. So my biggest concern, though, is that you don't have any testimony from any of these folks at all. They don't have the opportunity to address these concerns, and I understand you're up against a November 16th deadline. It's quite concerning that this is your only window to make this decision, and that they're going to be completely out of the process when you haven't heard from them at all. I will confess, didn't have time to read the entire report, so I don't know if they had the opportunity to provide input, and that this, make or break decision was being made today. But I would just offer that as a counterpoint on behalf of my friends who actually do this work. So, from a consumer point, I think it would be the point that's been raised that consumers may find themselves on one of these sites. It would be critically important that they understand that they can get a link, or that there is a link or a reference to the exchange. Because if that's where they come in, that would be part of the no wrong door policy that this exchange has built. So at least having that negotiation needs to continue, whatever the decision is of the exchange board. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Is there any committee comment, or first of all, any other public comment on the telephone? Any other public comment in Carson City? We have one public comment in Las Vegas, and then we'll go to committee comments.
For the record, Barry Gold, AARP Director of Government Relations. While not specifically commenting pro or con, something you may want to consider the last discussion with the convoluted nature of the appeals process. If web brokers did participate, how would that interface would happen, and would they be that first point of contact like a normal producer or a navigator, and what could that mean to a consumer as well? Thank you.
Committee comments, please. Ms. Ellis.
Just for a point of clarification, the motion was not to allow web brokers to enroll consumers in the exchange, or is it to exclude them from participating entirely on any type of process with the exchange, which may include the request to put a link on their website to send or drive people to the exchange?
For the record, C.J. Bowden, to address that comment, Ms. Ellis, the exchange could very easily advertise and spend advertising dollars with each of these web brokers that are out there and put our link on their exchange. If they allow advertising from other entities, we could purchase the rights to put our link on their page and have traffic driven in that direction as well. At this point in time, the decision, we've looked at the committee calendar, and there is one more consumer assistance meeting that we could put in October. It would be October 10th, and that would give us one board meeting before to get it approved before the blueprint. But at that point in time, staff is on a very strict time schedule to get the information into the blueprint and get all the requirements corrected. But if we vote that they didn't participate in the first year, or if the committee decides that they weren't going to participate in the first year, they could participate in years after that as well.
And one more item for the record, John Hager. So we can't get any additional research done in time. I was under the impression, and I have to reread the overview, that PCG, when coming up with this report, did outreach to all of the web-based brokers in Nevada, and these are the ones that responded. We can't get any more research done by the 10th or in time for the deadline. If the committee wants to, we could reach out specifically to those web-based brokers and see if they want to participate in the committee meeting for the public comment periods. Although I will say that that a lot of them, or I'm not sure if a lot of them, I know there are at least one or two that are noticed of these meetings each time with the rest of the public. There's a distribution list, and this meeting has been publicly noticed properly. So I just provide that information. There might be some public comment on the phone, too.
Is there any public comment on the phone? I guess just jumping on the end of that, Mr. Hager, I appreciate Ms. Cafferetta's comments. I do think, though, that the brokers have been incredibly helpful vocal and have absolutely been part of this entire process. And if the web broker community is a bit of a different animal and has chosen not to participate in all of these months, I do believe they've had an opportunity to be heard, and I believe they knew that the report was being compiled by PCG and could have participated in that sense as well. And if staff does not have resources or time to prepare anything else for our next meeting, I don't think I don't know that we would have anything else to consider really at this point. So was your clarification? Yes. That was okay. So we have a motion and a second to not include web brokers in enrolling people in the exchange. Any further comment or discussion from our committee members? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. That motion passes. And that closes agenda item 6. And we are now on agenda item 7. Are there any other action items or anything we need to discuss for the next meeting? I actually have one thing.
So for the record, John Hager.
If I could just, I've had 2 committee members up here tell me they're not able to attend the next meeting, so I just would ask staff to make sure we are going to have a quorum. And they're not going to participate by phone either.
Sure, for the record, John Hager. So yeah, the next meeting that we actually had scheduled was on the 10th. However, that will not give us enough time to bring a full, proper report back regarding appeals. Basically, the remainder of the focus of this committee, as far as we have on our committee calendar, unless the board says otherwise, is to focus on the appeals and the overall consumer process. And so at this point, I don't think there's going to be a meeting in October. We'll probably push that back until November. We'll have Athena get back to the committee on when the next meeting will be.
Thank you. Are there any other items for the meeting in November? Mr. Downey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randall Downey for the record. Mr. Hager, I would hope that on the report on appeals that you could include processes for the plan appeals as well, a discussion of how that process is going to work in terms of denials of service, payment, et cetera, and how that meshes with the work of the exchange. And I would also like us to take up the subject, and I know it's been poo-pooed in the past, but I think it's incumbent upon this for the viability of the exchange and consumer protections therein, that this committee make a recommendation to the board that the governor accept federal funding for the expansion of Medicaid, and I think that's an issue we need to discuss.
Thank you for your comments. And with that, are we adjourned? Oh, public comment. We have one person in Las Vegas.
Good afternoon, subcommittee members. My name is Dan Heffley, for the record, and I am an independent broker. I just wanted to offer some insight into some of the challenges that the subcommittee are facing. Many of the consumers will be purchasing insurance for the first time, and as such, they'll be unsophisticated in insurance claims. So many initial claim complaints will be more from consumers not understanding what they purchased and not from a carrier's not honoring their obligations. So this is where initial education and ongoing hand-holding is key. I am glad that the committee recognizes that having a consumer appeal directly to the insurance company that denied the claim in the first place may not best serve the unsophisticated consumer. Third-party options, such as GovCha, and training of navigators and producers in claims adjudication assistance will have an important role. The comment I have is that many producers assist currently in claims adjudication and appeals on a budget-neutral basis to the exchange. I would also ask that the subcommittee really think about requiring producers to provide these services, as that will reduce access due to the increased man hours required in a depressed market, and also opens up additional liabilities if the appeal does not turn out as the consumer expects for the producers who assisted them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any public comment from Carson City?
Good morning, good afternoon. We're right on the cusp. Elisa Cafferetta, this time testifying on behalf of Nevada Advocates for Planned Parenthood affiliates. And this is a request for a future agenda item. I'm not even sure which committee it would fall under. Regarding the essential health benefits, you've made 3 recommendations, or there have been made 3 recommendations to the Division of Insurance, and we will be testifying there later this week. It has come to my attention, we are in the process at our 5 health centers of starting the conversations of contracting with insurance providers. And 2 of the 3 that were recommended, the HHP Health Hometown Health Plan, D and F, currently do not have contracts with the Planned Parenthood health centers, and they have said, we will contact you if and when we need to contract with you. This is, of course, of great concern to us, and we believe there's guidance in the federal rules that that within the exchange, qualified health plans need to contract with all essential community providers, so that we know there's a shortage of providers as is, and if they are selective in who they are contracting with, this will further exacerbate the problem of getting access to health care. So we hope that the appropriate committees will consider a policy direction that all qualified health plans will contract with all essential community providers who are interested in providing those services. And again, I'm not sure which committee that would fall under, but in terms of consumer access to health care, it's a critical issue for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. We'll make sure to get that to the appropriate committee. Any other public comment? Any public comment on the telephone before we adjourn? No. Thank you again for participating, all of our committee members, the public. We really appreciate it. These are all new issues for everybody, and I really thank everyone for their participation, and thank you to staff for working so hard at preparing all the materials, and for us every day. We know how hard you guys are working. So thank you, and with that, the meeting's adjourned.